No warning, no countdown. Just anger, fear, and voices that could no longer stay silent. Overnight, the streets of Iran filled with protesters. Men and women, young and old, poured out of their homes and into public squares, chanting against rising pressure, crushing economic hardship, and years of political frustration. The air felt heavy with tension. Smartphone videos flooded social media, crowds pushing through narrow city streets. Security forces standing shoulder to shoulder, sirens echoing in the background, and faces filled with both courage and desperation. It looked like a nation holding its breath, unsure of what the next moment would bring. This wasn't just another protest. This felt different. People weren't only demanding better living conditions or lower prices. This time, they were questioning power itself, who holds it, how it is used, and whether the future promised to them would ever arrive. Chants grew bolder. Messages grew sharper. Soon after, internet slowdowns followed, making it harder for the outside world to see what was happening. Reports of arrests began to surface, adding fear to an already tense atmosphere. As the world watched closely, analysts, governments, and media outlets all reached the same conclusion. Iran was entering another dangerous and unpredictable chapter. But the real shock wasn't just inside Iran. It was how fast the global powers reacted, and how quickly this local unrest began to ripple across the international stage, turning a domestic crisis into a global concern. While tensions rose, Donald Trump delivered a warning that immediately grabbed international attention. His message was sharp, direct, unapologetic. Speaking with the confidence that defined his presidency, Trump accused Iran's leadership of pushing its own people to the edge while simultaneously threatening regional and global stability. He claimed the protests were not random outbreaks of anger, but the result of years of pressure, mismanagement, and broken promises. According to Trump, the Iranian government had ignored the voices of its citizens for too long, and now those voices were impossible to silence. He warned that continued unrest, combined with aggressive behavior beyond Iran's borders, would not be ignored by the United States or its allies. His message was clear: actions would have consequences, and those consequences could arrive faster than many expected. There was no soft language, no diplomatic cushioning, just a blunt reminder of power and resolve. Supporters praised his strong stance, calling it leadership and clarity in a moment of uncertainty. Critics, however, labeled it provocative, arguing that such words could escalate an already fragile situation. But no one ignored it. Trump's words echoed across diplomatic circles, newsrooms, and foreign capitals, reviving memories of his maximum pressure approach. He framed the protests not as chaos, but as evidence of a system under deep strain, one that, in his view, was beginning to crack under its own weight. As Western leaders debated statements, emergency meetings, and possible sanctions, Russia and China were already in motion. Russia moved first, publicly reaffirming its political and strategic ties with Iran. Moscow labeled the protests an internal matter, firmly warning other nations against interference. On the surface, the message sounded diplomatic, but beneath it was strategy. Analysts believe Russia sees opportunity in instability. Stronger access to critical energy routes, deeper military cooperation, and increased leverage against Western influence in the region. In times of crisis, alliances can tighten, and Moscow appeared ready to strengthen its grip. China, on the other hand, played a quieter, but far more calculated game. Beijing spoke calmly about the importance of stability and non-intervention, avoiding dramatic headlines. Yet behind the scenes, economic engagement continued without pause. Oil agreements remained active. Infrastructure projects stayed on track. Long-term investments quietly reinforced China's presence. China doesn't shout. It studies, plans, and waits for the right moment to expand influence. Together, Russia and China sent a clear and coordinated signal. They were watching Iran closely, and they had no intention of stepping back. This wasn't about protests alone. This was about the global balance of power, and while the world's attention stayed fixed on the Middle East, another strategic move was unfolding far from the protests, silent, cold, and incredibly important, near the Arctic. A frozen land, a vast stretch of ice and rock, a sparse population spread across an unforgiving landscape. And suddenly, global interest. For years, Trump's public interest in Greenland was mocked. Late-night jokes, headlines filled with disbelief. Many dismissed it as unrealistic or symbolic. But now experts are looking back and quietly rethinking everything. What once sounded strange is beginning to look strategic. Why Greenland? Because it sits at the crossroads of future power. Climate change is reshaping the Arctic faster than predicted. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes that could cut weeks off global trade paths. Beneath the ice lie rare earth minerals, critical for technology, defense systems, and renewable energy. Whoever controls access to these resources gains a massive advantage. Military positioning in the Arctic is also becoming more important than ever. As Russia expands its Arctic bases and increases patrols, and as China declares itself a near-Arctic state while eyeing polar trade routes, Greenland becomes more than land. It becomes leverage. For the West, Greenland is a strategic shield. Analysts now believe Trump's earlier push wasn't random or impulsive. It was long-term thinking ahead of its time. Control influence in Greenland, and you influence future trade, defense routes, and Arctic dominance. While Iran burns politically, Greenland freezes strategically. Two very different regions, one global chessboard. They are connected. What may look like isolated headlines are actually pieces of the same global puzzle. Protests in Iran weaken internal control and expose cracks within the system. Trump's warnings add external pressure, reminding the world that major powers are watching and ready to respond. Russia and China move carefully but deliberately, stepping in to secure influence where uncertainty creates opportunity. At the same time, Greenland emerges as a silent but critical strategic prize, far from the chaos, yet deeply tied to the future balance of power. This is how modern power struggles work, not always through open war or dramatic battles, but through positioning, economics, diplomacy, and perfect timing. Influence is gained quietly, sometimes without a single shot being fired. For everyday people watching the news, all of this can feel overwhelming and confusing. Stories appear disconnected. Locations seem unrelated. But when viewed together, a clear pattern begins to form. Here's the simple truth. The world is shifting. Old alliances are being tested as trust weakens. New strategies are forming quietly behind closed doors. And every protest, every warning, every strategic move is part of something much bigger than it first appears. What happens next in Iran could reshape stability across the Middle East. What Russia and China do next could redefine global power. And what the West decides about places like Greenland could influence the future for generations to come.